They came out of the dark, in a circle. That was the thing about Vekhari pack hunters. They didn't charge. They didn't announce themselves. They simply appeared. One moment the forest was empty. The next it wasn't. 7 of them, materializing from between the trees like shadows that had decided to have opinions, completing the circle with the quiet, terrible precision of creatures that had been doing this for 10,000 years and had never once needed to update the strategy. Because it always worked. Scout Specialist Daan Mori noticed the first one at his 11 o'clock, then the second at his 4. By the time he had counted 7, he had also, calmly and without drama, completed the calculation that his situation required. 7 Vekhari. Pack formation. Full encirclement, spacing consistent, no gaps. Moving inward at the slow, unhurried pace of predators who understood that the circle was already the conclusion and everything after was just time passing. His rifle was on his back. He left it there. The Vekhari were not what the Conclave's threat registry called simple predators. They were something more complicated than that. Pack intelligent, socially complex, capable of communication sophisticated enough that 3 different xenolinguistics teams had spent a combined 40 years trying to formally categorize it and had filed reports that all essentially concluded, "We think they're talking, we just can't prove it yet." What the registry had never managed to quantify, because quantifying it required someone willing to sit inside a Vekhari circle long enough to find out, was what happened when you didn't run. Every documented encounter ended the same way. The human ran. The Vekhari ran faster. Daan Mori had read every one of those reports. He sat down, cross-legged, hands loose in his lap. He set his pack beside him with the unhurried care of someone settling in for something that might take a while. The circle stopped moving. 7 predators. 0 movement. The forest held its breath. The Vekhari were built like something between a wolf and a decision. Low-slung, broad-shouldered, with forelimbs slightly longer than their hind ones that gave their stillness a coiled, loaded quality, like furniture that was also a weapon. Their coats absorbed the dim forest light rather than reflecting it. Their eyes did the opposite. 7 pairs of pale amber, burning steady in the dark, all pointed at the same thing. Daan, who was sitting cross-legged on the forest floor, eating a dried fruit ration with the specific, unhurried attention of someone who had decided this moment deserved his full presence. He had not planned this. That was important to understand. He had not come into the Vekhari forest with a theory to test or a protocol to attempt or any of the deliberate, documented intentionality that would later be written into the official account of what happened here. He had been mapping a river tributary. His calm had gone down in the particulate interference that plagued this entire sector, and by the time he registered the circle, it was already complete. The choice had been simple. Run into a closing circle of pack hunters with a 10,000-year-old strategy, or don't. He didn't. The largest Vekhari, positioned directly ahead of him, dead center of his 12 o'clock, took 1 step forward. Daan looked up from his ration, looked at it, looked back down, finished chewing. The Vekhari stopped. Something moved through the pack, not sound exactly, not movement exactly, but a shift in collective attention that was its own kind of language, the kind that 3 xenolinguistics teams had spent 40 years trying to categorize. Daan reached into his pack, pulled out his field journal, opened it to a blank page, started writing. The circle watched him write. Nobody moved for a very long time. Then 1 step, not inward, sideways. Sideways meant something. Daan didn't know it yet. But in 10 years of xenobiology field work across 14 postings, he had learned one thing with absolute consistency. Movement that isn't toward you and isn't away from you is a question. He kept writing, not frantically, not performing calm, actually calm, the particular calm that lives on the other side of a fear you've already finished having. His field journal entries were precise and detailed the way they always were, because the discipline of observation was the only thing he fully trusted in situations his training hadn't covered. He wrote, 7 individuals, pack formation, standard encirclement, subject count consistent with reported maximum pack size for this region. Current behavior, stationary, 1 individual presumed Alpha, center forward position, stepped sideways approximately 40 centimeters at 0314. Reason unknown. Sitting position maintained. No aggressive response from Pack. He paused, added one more line. They smell like pine and copper. Interesting. The Alpha stepped sideways again. Same direction. Same measured distance. Moving slowly along the inside of the circle's edge with the deliberateness of something conducting an experiment. Daan tracked it with peripheral vision only. Direct eye contact in pack-predator dynamics was almost universally a challenge. He had read enough to know that much. He kept his gaze on his journal, letting his peripheral awareness do the work, breathing in the long, slow rhythm that his body had settled into sometime around minute 3, when it had apparently decided that panic was not going to be useful here and had quietly stood down. The Alpha completed a quarter circle, stopped, stared at him. He wrote 3 more words in his journal. It's assessing me. Then something happened that made him stop writing completely. The Alpha sat down. Not a predator crouch. Not the coiled readiness of something preparing to spring. It sat the way Daan was sitting, weight settled, posture neutral, attention forward. Mirroring him, he stared at his journal page for a moment, then he looked up, slowly, carefully, no sudden movement, and met its pale, amber eyes directly for the first time. Neither of them looked away. For seconds of direct eye contact with an apex pack predator. 5, 6. The xenobiology textbooks all said the same thing about this moment. That direct eye contact with a pack hunter at close range triggered an escalation response. That it was challenge. That it was declaration. The textbooks had clearly never tried it this way. The Alpha didn't escalate. It tilted its head. Slowly. The way something does when it encounters a sound outside its experience, not alarmed, not threatened, simply genuinely, carefully curious. The pale, amber eyes stayed on Daan's face with an attention so complete and so focused that he felt, in some specific and inarticulate way, thoroughly read. The rest of the pack hadn't moved. They were watching the Alpha watch him. Daan understood suddenly that the circle wasn't a trap anymore. It was an audience. He made a decision. Small, deliberate, the kind of decision that looks unremarkable from the outside and is enormous from the inside. He reached into his pack slowly, no sudden movement, every action telegraphed, each gesture given enough time to be understood as intentional, and pulled out a second dried fruit ration. He placed it on the ground between himself and the Alpha. Then he moved his hand back, settled it in his lap, looked back at his journal, giving it a choice with no pressure attached. 40 seconds passed. He counted them without meaning to. On 41, the Alpha rose, still unhurried, still measured, and crossed the distance between them in 4 quiet steps that Daan felt more than heard, each paw placement deliberate on the forest floor. It stopped at the ration, sniffed it with the focused thoroughness of something that takes information seriously. Then it looked up at Daan. He looked back. It ate the ration in one motion and sat back down. Closer now, half the previous distance. Near enough that Daan could see the individual guard hairs of its coat catching the dim light. Near enough to hear it breathing. Something shifted in the circle. The 6 remaining pack members, reading something in the Alpha's posture that Daan couldn't yet decode, moved simultaneously. Not inward. They sat down too. All 6. One after another. Like a decision passed through the group the way wind passes through grass. Daan looked at his journal. Found the next blank line. Wrote 7 words with a hand that was not entirely steady. I think I just passed something. His comm came back online at 0347. He stared at it for a moment. Then he turned it off. Base Commander Yella Thresh had been running a missing scout protocol for 2 hours when Daan's position beacon finally pinged on her display. Active signal. Stationary. Deep inside the Vekhari forest boundary that every operational guideline marked in red and annotated with the word avoid in 4 languages. She dispatched a retrieval drone immediately. Standard protocol. Quiet approach. Thermal imaging. The drone found him 4 minutes later and transmitted its feed to her console. She looked at the image for a long time without speaking. Then she called her deputy over. They looked at it together. The thermal feed showed 9 heat signatures in a rough circle on the forest floor. 1 human-sized, 8 significantly larger. All of them stationary. All of them oriented inward. The human signature at the center was showing the relaxed, low-output thermal reading of someone in a calm, resting state. The 8 Vekhari signatures surrounding it were showing something the drone's behavioral analysis system had never been asked to categorize before. The deputy pulled up the behavioral analysis output. It read, pack formation, stationary, threat, indicators, minimal, current classification, unknown. Unknown, the deputy said. Yes, Thresh said. The system has never returned unknown for a Vekhari pack formation. No. She kept looking at the feed. It always returns one thing. The deputy knew what she meant. Every Vekhari pack encounter in the database ended the same way. One outcome. One classification. Pull up his audio feed, she said. The deputy activated it. For a moment, there was only forest sound. Whined through alien canopy. The low hum of the drone. Then, barely audible, felt more than heard, something else. A sound that the Vekhari behavioral database had never once recorded in proximity to a human. Low, rhythmic, resonant, the pack was vocalizing. Not a hunting call. Not a warning. Something the xenolinguistics teams had documented only in observations of Vekhari pack behavior among themselves. Arresting sound. Thresh sat back in her chair, very slowly. Don't send the retrieval team, she said. The drone stayed. Thresh kept the feed open on her primary console and did something she had not done in 11 years of base command. She watched and did nothing. In the forest, Daan had stopped writing, not because he had run out of things to observe, because at some point in the last hour the act of documenting had quietly given way to something simpler, something that didn't require a journal or a protocol or any of the professional apparatus he had carried into this forest. He was just sitting. The alpha was 2 meters away, still mirroring his posture with the unsettling precision it had maintained since minute 20. The other 6 had redistributed themselves around the original circle with the unhurried ease of creatures settling into something they intended to maintain for a while. The resting vocalization moved through them in slow waves. Daan had stopped analyzing it around the 40-minute mark. He had started listening to it instead. At 0500 the forest light shifted, barely, the dim canopy above filtering the first indication of a sun that was still an hour from proper rising, turning everything from black to the particular dark blue that precedes color. The pack responded to it collectively, heads lifting, ears rotating, a shared recalibration that moved through all 8 of them like a single thought. The alpha stood. Daan looked up. It looked at him with those pale, amber eyes one more time. The same complete focused attention as the first time, the same quality of being thoroughly read. Then it did something that Daan would spend considerable effort describing in his official report, and that no official report language would ever quite capture. It stepped forward, closed the remaining distance between them, and pressed its broad forehead, briefly, deliberately, with a pressure that was neither aggressive nor tentative against Daan's. 1 second. 2. Then it stepped back, turned, walked into the dark between the trees. The 6 others followed in single file. No ceremony, no sound, simply gone. The forest returning to itself the way it had been before, as if the circle had never existed. Daan sat completely still for a long moment. Then he opened his journal, looked at the blank line beneath his last entry, sat with his pen above the page for almost a minute, wrote 1 sentence, then closed the journal, picked up his pack, and started walking back toward base. Thresh watched him emerge from the tree line at 0537. Alone, unhurried, pack on his back, journal in his hand, the specific expression of someone who has been somewhere they don't have the right words for yet. She met him at the perimeter, looked at him for a moment, looked at the tree line behind him, looked back. The drone caught everything, she said. I know. The forehead thing. Yes. She waited. He seemed to be deciding something. Then he held out the journal. open to the last entry. She read the single sentence he had written after. She read it again, handed it back without speaking. They walked back to base in silence, the kind that happens when something has occurred that both people understand cannot be made smaller by talking about it yet. The official report took Daan 4 days to write. Not because the events were complicated, because the language kept failing him. Every sentence he wrote felt like a smaller version of what had actually happened. The way a photograph of a mountain is technically accurate and completely insufficient simultaneously. He filed it anyway. The Conclave's Xenolinguistics Division contacted him within 48 hours. Then the Behavioral Research Team. Then a council advisory board that had apparently been trying to establish meaningful Vekhari contact for 60 years and wanted to know, with the barely contained urgency of people who had been patient for a very long time, exactly what he had done. He told them the truth. Nothing. He had done nothing. He had sat down, stayed calm, and waited long enough for the situation to become something other than what it first appeared to be. The advisory board found this answer unsatisfying. He found their dissatisfaction interesting. He went back to the forest on day 7. No mission directive, no protocol, no drone. He had specifically requested no drone, a request that Thresh had approved after a pause long enough to contain an entire internal argument. He went to the same coordinates, the same patch of forest floor, sat down in the same position, pack beside him, journal in his lap. He waited. 40 minutes passed. Then the circle formed, quieter than the first time, faster, the pack emerging from the trees with the ease of creatures returning to something already decided. The Alpha took its position at 12 o'clock, sat down immediately. No hesitation, no assessment period, no ration required, just recognition. Thresh read his field note that evening. One line, the same discipline as always, the same precision. They remembered. She sat with that for a long time. The journal sentence, the one he had written in the forest after the Alpha walked away. The one she had read at the perimeter and returned without speaking. She had thought about it every day since. It wasn't scientific. It wasn't fieldwork language. It didn't belong in any official report, and Daan had known that when he wrote it, which was probably why he had written it there, in the journal, in the forest, in the moment, rather than anywhere that required it to be defensible. It said, I think it said goodbye, like it planned to see me again. He was right. The Conclave's first formal Vekhari communication study launched 8 months later. The first researcher cleared for unsupervised forest entry was Daan Mori, a distinction that required 6 separate committee approvals and 1 recorded statement from Thresh that said simply, he already has their trust. Everything else is paperwork. The Xenolinguistics team spent 3 years documenting what passed between the pack and the human who sat down when he should have run. They never fully decoded it, but they agreed on one thing. Every session, every visit, every time Daan crossed the forest boundary and sat down and waited, the pack always came back. Not because they had to, because something had been established in a circle on a dark forest floor between a human who stopped running and a predator who stopped charging, something quiet and specific, and without a clean name in any language the Conclave had catalogued. Not alliance. Not taming, not any of the words that required one party to be diminished. Something more like understanding, the kind that starts when one living thing sits down in the middle of everything telling it to run, and another living thing notices and decides that means something worth returning to,